All right, so the last method that we are going to cover as we're talking about solving a quadratic expression is the quadratic formula. Now, if you type in the quadratic formula into YouTube or into Google, you will see hundreds upon hundreds of videos and probably people dancing around to songs of different versions for the quadratic formula. I will eventually teach you my song version in class, but for this video here, we're going to go through the basics of the quadratic formula, and then I'll show you two quick examples of solving a quadratic using the quadratic formula. So, given any quadratic expression in the format ax squared plus bx plus c, a, b, and c are all just coefficients and numbers, the quadratic formula is x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. And that is the quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and all of that is over 2a. Now notice that I did some color coding here. I left a as being red, b as being green, and then c is blue. So let's talk about the steps if we are going to use the quadratic formula here. So steps. The first one's pretty simple. We've done this in the past. You have to set the expression equal to 0. And I can't stress that enough that it has to be equal to 0. If it's not equal to 0, then you need to rearrange it. You want to identify your a, b, and c. So you want to identify those three numbers there, a, b, and c. And then it's pretty simple. You're just going to plug it into the equation or plug into formula and simplify. So the quadratic formula is really nice because it doesn't matter if it's an expression that you're able to factor, if it's one that doesn't have a linear expression that you would need to solve by the square root method. You can use the quadratic formula at any time that you have a quadratic expression. So let's look at an example here. So let's say I gave you 4n, or I'll choose x, 4x squared plus 2x minus 13 is equal to 7. Now the first step is it has to equal 0. So I'm going to subtract 7 on both sides and get this to be equaling 0. So 4x squared plus 2x minus 20 is equal to 0. So step 1's done. We get our expression down, and now it's equal to 0. Step 2 is identify your a, b, and c values. So a, I'm going to do a smaller highlighter here. A is the coefficient in front of the x squared. B is your coefficient in front of the x, your linear term. And then c is the constant, including that sign that comes at the end of your expression. So here's negative 20. So I've got a is 4, b is positive 2, and c is negative 20. So make sure that the signs also come along with those numbers. So let's plug it into our formula here. X equals negative b. So I'm going to use parentheses every time, and then we'll get rid of those later. Oop, b is a number. It's 2. plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's 2 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 4, times b, which is negative 20, and then all of that is being divided by 2 times a, which is 4. So here is just us plugging in all of the numbers into the quadratic formula. Negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times negative 20 over 2 times 4. Now, we can simplify this by just multiplying numbers inside of our square root here. So if we simplify this square root and then we multiply numbers together, we can simplify this expression here. So let's do so. I'm going to have x is equal to, that would be negative 2 here, plus or minus the square root of 2 squared is 4, and then negative 4 times 4 is 16, times negative 20 is positive 320, divided by, and then on the bottom, 2 times 4 is 8. So let's keep that going. Let's add 4 and 320. So x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 324, all divided by 8. So x is equal to negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 324 is 18, all over 8. Now, I don't want to leave it like this, and if you recall from our previous lesson, we talked about when you have a plus or minus a number, that there's going to be two equations here. So those two different equations, I can break this out, and I can say that x is equal to negative 2 plus 18 divided by 8, or x equals negative 2 minus 18 divided by 8. And then just simplify those expressions. Negative 2 plus 18 is 16 divided by 8. So I get x is equal to 2. And then negative 2 minus 18 divided by 8 is negative 5 halves. So x equals negative 5 over 2. So here are my answers. X equals 2 and x equals negative 5 over 2. So that's one way, and I know it looks like a lot, and really the quadratic formula just requires a lot of practice because it takes some organization of knowing where to plug things in and what to simplify and how to organize your thinking from there. Let me show you another example here, and this one will not have rational answers coming in at the end, but it'll still be something very similar to what we're looking at here. So let's do, it's going to be example 2 here. Say I give you 3x squared minus 2x plus 1 is equal to 4. Now, similar to the last problem, you have to make that equal to 0 first, so we're going to subtract 4 on both sides, and we get 3x squared minus 2x minus 3 is equal to 0. So now that it's equal to 0, I can identify a, b, and c. A is 3. B is negative 2. And c is negative 3. So remember that your number also will include the sign that's with it. 3 is positive here. The negative, or the 2 is negative, so you want to make sure that you include the negative with it. And then 3 is also negative, so that has to come along as well. So plugging into our formula, x is equal to, now careful here because this is supposed to be negative b, so it's negative 2 plus or minus the square root, bad square root, of negative 2 squared. Notice how I'm using parentheses around negatives. Minus 4 times a, which was 3, times c, which is negative 3, all over 2 times a, which is 3. Now, that first part there, the negative 2, that just is going to turn it positive. So we get x is equal to a positive 2 now, plus or minus. Let's simplify inside this square root. Negative 2 squared is 4, and then negative 4 times 3 is 12, times a negative 3 is positive 36, all over 2 times 3, which is 6. So let's keep that going there. 4 plus 36 is 40, so x is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 40 divided by 6. The square root of 40, we can simplify that. It's 4 and 10, and then 4. Ooh, I don't know why that slid up there. 4 is going to be 2 and 2. So if we simplify the square root only, we get x is equal to 2 plus or minus 2 square root of 10 over 6. Now, you're almost done with this because the square root of 10 can't be simplified, but if you notice that all of these numbers here, these terms 2, 2, and 6, if we think of this as like simplifying a fraction, 2 and 6 simplify with each other, and then 2 and 6 simplify with each other again. So really, if I wanted to simplify this, I would have 1 plus or minus 2, or 1 square root of 10 over 3. So if we simplify, we get this answer. And it is two different numbers because you would have 1 plus 1 square root of 10 over 3 and 1 minus 1 square root of 10 over 3. So these are two examples of the quadratic formula as well as the quadratic formula itself. Make sure you copy down these notes into your notebook on page 54, and we will